Two police cars pulled up in front of Emily Carter's house just after sunrise, and the HOA president stood beside them, pointing directly at the front door. But what unfolded over the next 10 minutes would shock the entire neighborhood and reveal a federal rule that changed everything. Emily Carter had lived in the quiet community of Brookstone Meadows for 6 years. Her small suburban home wasn't luxurious, but it radiated warmth. Every morning, she watered the flowers lining the walkway while neighbors passed by walking their dogs, offering friendly waves. Her husband, Daniel Carter, worked long hours as an engineer, but together they cherished the calm and peaceful street. Everything began to shift when the new HOA president took over. Karen Whitmore believed rules should be followed exactly as written without exception. At first, the notices were minor: a complaint about the color of the mailbox, a warning about a garden bench near the porch. But soon, the letters became more serious. Karen claimed Emily was violating HOA policies by running an unauthorized home business. Emily was confused. She wasn't running any business. She simply worked remotely for a national company, answering customer service calls from her laptop in the living room. Daniel reached out to the HOA to clarify the misunderstanding, but Karen refused to reconsider. Just 3 days later, she made a decision that stunned the entire neighborhood. She called the police and insisted that Emily needed to be removed from the property immediately. What Karen didn't realize was that federal law was about to shut her plan down instantly. The officers approached the front door calmly. Emily opened it with a puzzled expression, still holding her morning coffee. Behind them stood Karen Whitmore, clutching a folder filled with documents. Karen spoke first, explaining that the HOA had issued multiple violations and that Emily was refusing to comply with neighborhood rules. According to her, the situation had escalated to the point where Emily should be removed from the property. The officers listened carefully and then asked Emily if she understood the complaint. She nodded politely before explaining something Karen clearly hadn't expected. Emily worked from home because she had been granted a federal accommodation through her employer. A medical condition made commuting extremely difficult, so her company allowed her to perform her job remotely. Her work required only a laptop and a headset. No customers visited the house. No signs were displayed outside. It was simply quiet computer work. The officers exchanged a brief glance. Karen insisted that HOA rules prohibited businesses operating from residential homes. But Emily calmly added that there was more to the situation. At that moment, Daniel stepped outside holding a printed document, and the entire conversation began to shift. The paper he held referenced federal protection that Karen had completely overlooked. Daniel handed the document to one of the officers. It was an official accommodation approval connected to federal disability law. The letter explained that Emily's remote work arrangement was a protected accommodation under federal regulations. This meant her employer had the right to allow her to work from home if it supported her health needs. More importantly, it clarified something critical. Local housing organizations and associations could not block reasonable accommodations tied to federally protected rights. The officer read the letter carefully before turning to Karen. He asked whether the HOA had reviewed any federal guidelines before issuing their eviction demand. Karen hesitated, insisting that HOA rules clearly prohibited businesses from operating in residential properties. But the officer explained something that shifted the tone of the entire situation. HOA rules could not override federal protections. By now, the street had grown quiet as neighbors slowly gathered outside to watch. Karen's confident posture began to fade. What she believed was a straightforward enforcement of rules was quickly turning into a serious legal mistake, and the next exchange would make that even clearer. The second officer stepped forward and spoke calmly. He explained that Emily was not violating any law by working remotely. Many Americans work from home, especially when medical accommodations were involved. The key issue was whether the activity caused disruption in the neighborhood. In Emily's case, there were no customers visiting, no extra vehicles, no business signage, just a laptop and a few phone calls. The officer looked back at Karen and explained that attempting to remove someone from their home without proper legal authority could create serious consequences for the HOA. Karen's expression shifted from confident to uneasy. She opened her folder and flipped through her papers, but none of the documents addressed federal accommodation protections. Daniel stood quietly beside Emily on the porch. He had expected another argument with the HOA. What he hadn't expected was police officers explaining federal housing law to the HOA president. Across the street, neighbors whispered among themselves. Karen slowly realized the situation she had tried to control was slipping away, and the next moment would determine how the entire conflict ended. Karen made one final attempt, arguing that the HOA board had voted to enforce the rule and that she was simply following community guidelines. But the officers explained that HOA boards must still comply with federal law. Community rules could not override federally protected accommodations. One officer handed the document back to Daniel and then spoke directly to Karen. He suggested the HOA review federal housing regulations before taking any further action, warning that the association could face serious legal consequences otherwise. Karen's face turned pale. The neighbors watching from their lawns understood what had just happened. The HOA president had attempted to force a resident out of her home, and the law had stopped it immediately. Without saying another word, Karen gathered her papers and walked back toward her car. The officers nodded politely to Daniel and Emily before returning to their patrol vehicles. Slowly, the street returned to its quiet morning routine, but news of what had happened spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. The next HOA meeting would become one of the most important gatherings the community had ever seen. A week later, the Brookstone Meadows clubhouse was packed. Residents filled every chair for the monthly HOA meeting, eager to hear what the board would say about the incident. Karen Whitmore sat quietly at the front table, no longer speaking with the same confidence she once had. Daniel and Emily sat together near the back. When the meeting began, another board member addressed the situation. He explained that the association had reviewed federal housing regulations following the police visit. The board acknowledged that Emily's remote work was a protected accommodation and admitted that the enforcement action had been a mistake. The room remained silent as he continued, stating that the HOA would update its policies to ensure similar situations would never happen again. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. For the first time in days, Daniel glanced at Emily. She looked relaxed. The conflict that had started with threats and police involvement was ending in a completely different way, and the final moment of the meeting would bring unexpected closure. At the end of the meeting, Karen Whitmore slowly stood up. Her voice was quieter than usual as she admitted she had acted too quickly while enforcing the rules. She explained that she hadn't fully understood the federal protections connected to Emily's situation. The room remained calm. Several residents thanked Daniel and Emily for handling the situation with respect. Instead of escalating the conflict into a larger legal battle, they had simply presented the facts and allowed the law to speak for itself. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to change in small but meaningful ways. The HOA revised its guidelines and established clearer communication with residents. Emily continued working peacefully from home. Each morning, she returned to watering the flowers along the walkway, and neighbors once again passed by with smiles and friendly waves. What began as a tense conflict ended with a lesson the entire community would remember. Sometimes, the strongest solutions don't come from arguments, but from understanding the rules that exist to protect everyone. And that was a final twist in this remarkable HOA story. If you enjoyed the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It truly helps the channel grow.